Our first speaker today is Victoria Schulz-Daubas. She is currently conducting a practical doctoral research project at the King's Foundation in London. Her research focuses on the philosophical concept of the sublime within the context of architectural practice, specifically through the creation of an illustrated speculative handbook on sublime design for architecture. Funds from the Lindsay Jones Memorial Research Fund supported field research at relevant sublime sites that inform this handbook. So, Victoria, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for everyone for having me. I'm going to share my screen now. I'm going into full screen. There we go. Right, so thank you again, everyone. I'm going to dive right in. So as Tom already said, some of my research is about trying to capture the sublime, which is already impossible to do because it's such an elusive concept, but I'm going to get to that. And I'm going to focus on presenting my travel. So, next one. So yeah, what is the sublime? So we use the word sublime in our normal language all the time, but what I'm looking at is the philosophical term sublime. So it's this notion, I don't want to say too much because I think everyone has their own view on it and it's also impossible to put into words, but it's this notion of being astonished, in awe of something and deeply moved by something. Often in nature, we feel it often in nature. Think about the mountains. This is a picture that I took in the Alps during one of the field trips. But so think of mountainscapes, incredible mountainscapes, or when you're out in the storm or seeing a storm coming and you have a delight. So not when you're really terrified by something, but when you're still able to feel the delight in the terrifying or awe-inspiring nature. But yeah, so this is sort of the concept that I'm looking at, but I don't want to say that I don't want to claim that this is the best definition of it, but just to see what I'm talking about. Then there's the philosophical sublime. So a lot of theory has been written on this subject, going back all the way to antiquity with the first text that's right on the top, the book right on the top, written by an unknown author called Longinus. So it's attributed to someone called Longinus, but we don't know who actually wrote it. And then lots and lots of philosophy has been written on the sublime during the Enlightenment and Romantic era. And then later, then it sort of a little bit, I don't want to say died down, but the interest, other things got more interesting than the sublime. And not a lot of research was written on that subject and of philosophy. And there are a lot of theories for that. With the Industrial Revolution and other things, but and the age of science. So because the sublime is so highly subjective, there's a theory that was one of the reasons why there's not so much written about it. But now in the recent years, maybe 10 years or so, we see a constant rise in interest again, which is nice to hear, I think, because it's such a wonderful topic to think about, talk about, and know more about. And what I was trying to do was read this key philosophy about the sublime and try and translate it into architecture. But of course, I very soon started to realize that that's such an impossible task to just translate philosophy into architecture, and also then this type of philosophy in particular, because it's such an elusive, such a vast idea. And this is an extract, a page from the first book written about it. This is the author that I mentioned who wrote during antiquity in the Roman Empire, and he wrote in ancient Greek, but in English we have it on the right side. And the first thing he says, one of the first thing he says, is that the sublime is about full-blooded ideas, inspiration of vehement emotion, general effect of dignity and elevation. So this was the most important thing for this author about the sublime. And this is one of the things that I think you can't just understand by reading text. So I really quickly thought I really need to go out and see the sublime in person, experience in person. I think that's really something that you can't avoid if you really want to understand what the sublime means. So I then started to, and this is where the research fund comes in. And so I started making a travel list and tried to think what destinations would be the best. And I didn't go there, so don't get excited, but I wanted to go to the Antarctica so much because I think this is such a good example. I'm showing it just because it's such a good example of something really, truly beautiful, absolutely beautiful and awe-inspiring, but also terrifying, absolutely terrifying for just a small human being to go there. So that was one of I'm just showing it because for me, that was when I started, that was the quintessence of the sublime, this picture of being walking in the Antarctic and just feeling so small and so in awe. But I didn't go there because it just didn't seem right, because I soon understood that the sublime is all about sustainability as well. So all of the philosophers talk about, well, the first one talks about nobility and purity of thought and things like, not purity of thought, but sort of grand thought, and all of them mention this community aspect, and to do something good somehow is connected. This virtue is often connected to the sublime. So it just seemed completely, it didn't feel right to go on a on a very unsustainable trip out there. And I just started thinking sustainability is such a recurrent theme within the sublime. So I started really looking at destinations that were easier to reach and closer to reach. But still, if you're close to the Antarctic, I think one day maybe I will go there. And if you're close, then you should go. So my personal travel list was then closer to the UK, because I was based in the UK, and also Ireland and Scotland. Northern Ireland and Ireland, and then destinations in France and at the Spanish border, the Pyrenees, in this French and Spanish border, and then the mud flats in northern Germany, and the Alps as well. So and then Naples was a bigger excursion, and then one little excursion I had to the US. I think there's so many amazing examples of the sublime in the US, but I only made it to the Route 66 in Oklahoma because I had to go there for a conference. But yeah, so this is just a very brief overview with a map, but I'm going to come to each of them, or the highlights at least, of these destinations. So then starting with the mud flats in Germany. So this is just you have it all over the world at certain coastal areas where it's very flat and you can really walk into the water. So I was able to go into the water and do really quick sketches, and it basically feels like you're in the ocean. This is a photograph that I took, and it basically feels like you're in the ocean, in the water, but it's super shallow, the water, so you can actually walk very far out, and it's basically like a mirror, the sky and the water. And so I did a lot of drawings, very quick drawings of that. So obviously different tones, but sepia color tones. Oh, sorry. Oh, I only show one. Sorry, I picked the best. Yeah, so I did plenty of this kind of quick sketches. Um, and then going to the next one, this was in the Spanish and French Pyrenees. So the Pyrenees are just the border between Spain and France. So it's hard to say which country, but just very quick again, en plein air sketches of what I saw. And I think interesting to see is that it's really, I always try and do a quick sketch, but try and draw what is most important to the sublime in that moment. And in that case, it's this ruggedness that I try to capture. So the Pyrenees, especially more on the Spanish side, I think, are extremely wild looking. They're very rugged and wild, and it really takes your breath away, I think. So I try to capture that. Then that is this one, possibly rushing a little bit too much, but this is the trip to Pompeii, Italy. So that was a completely different sublime, because before it was more about the sublime in the wild nature, in the mountains, or in the ocean. But this is an architecture sublime, I think, but also looking at ruins. So I think this is partly human made, but partly not, because it was never meant to be such a ruined city, so well conserved on the other hand. So this is sort of nature reclaiming human built structures. So there's something really strong about being around the ruins of Pompeii. And then not only the ruins of the outside that are left, but also when you go to the archaeological museum or to the museums on the site, they have recovered some of these wall paintings. And that was one really, really interesting aspect that I didn't really think about that much when I thought about Pompeii until I saw it, where these beautiful and well conserved wall paintings. And I think it's incredible what what the people that was actually the art around the time of the first author on the Sublime. So I think this is a little bit, I've tried and think about it like a little bit of what the author had in mind, or the cultural context surrounding the author, because we know he or she, I suppose, was living in the Roman Empire. Um, Somewhere around 100 AD. And just to look at this kind of art, it's also very quick artworks, because you had to do quick strokes during the frescoes because they dried very quickly. And then just to these were the kind of themes of the art, and think that's really interesting, that it's these dramatic aspects, and a lot about what this author of the first manuscript on the Sublime talks about is drama, and sort of transporting the audience out of themselves, and just sort of taking them by surprise and carrying them away with really well narrated scenes from mostly writings of Homer, so Iliad, and yeah, mostly the Iliad. I think he's quoting as the sublime style in literature and drama. Sorry. Then we're coming to the travel sketches from Pompeii, but I'm just showing really brief ones. So again, I tried at that point to do real quick ink drawings and quick pencil drawings and charcoal drawings, to just capture what I thought was really important in that moment, sort of trying to get a bit of this atmosphere by doing it quick and sort of this runny ink. So a little bit trying to capture that it's a fleeting moment, a fleeting impression that I had. Then I went to Stonehenge. That was actually not too far away from where I was living in England, just a 2 hour drive. And I remember this is a picture taken from the air, so this is not my own picture, but when I was driving only along the road where you can have the first glimpse of Stonehenge, I felt such awe in my belly, really. I will never forget it. And I think this is my favorite place in the whole world, because I think it probably doesn't do the same to everyone, but I think it's so breathtaking just to see it without even, and I think this is one of the examples of the Sublime where you don't need any background, because the background is a big mystery anyway. But even without the background, you just look at these ancient, huge rocks, and it's just awe-inspiring, just without even thinking too much about who did it and why, and all this amazing craft that went into it, and just this big mystery of how it was even possible. But just to see it, I think is just so breathtaking. So I did quick drawings there as well. Just sort of, you can see they changed depending on where I looked at it. And yeah, and then I did a more in-depth charcoal drawing where I tried to again capture this ruggedness of it, and yeah, just trying to capture this really big impression it made on me to be there. And then we went along the wild Atlantic coast of Ireland, and that was also completely amazing. We went there for 4 days by car as well, and drove along the Wild Atlantic Way, it's called. It's really absolutely worth doing, even if I only reached the more northern areas of the Wild Atlantic Way of the West Coast. Just absolutely stunning to be there. It's just this wildness of nature there, and just and the little small architecture in between, and you just feel completely yeah, it's this notion of the small self that I'm going to get to a bit later on in the theory. But yeah, so just a little picture, a little painting, very quick also of the seascapes there and the wild stormy character. And then one of the more recent ones was a field trip to Scotland. That was one of the most formative field trips I think I did, because Scotland is just one of the most beautiful places, I think. And it's just every single day, every single hour of every single day, everything's changing so fast. You just look, and 10 minutes later, the clouds have completely shifted and the light has completely shifted. And just you just feel it's so transforming. Um, and just it was so inspiring to be there. I think the Sublime is not only it's not for anyone specific, but particularly I think if you're an artist or a writer or anyone with a sort of blockade, like writer's blockade, or if you're doing a research project or so, and you can't sort of you can't take a step back and you're just too deep into it, then you just need to go to one of these places and it immediately gives you new inspiration. And that's what I felt, at least. So I think it's really so much benefit in going out there and doing trips like that. Then I did, and then I think it was in Scotland that I started doing almost exclusively charcoal drawings. This was in the Isle of Skye, and that was from Loch Lomond. And Isle of Skye again. And then just trying to catch this view of how fast it's moving, because charcoal is a really good, I think, a really good medium to use, because you can do it so fast and you get a big effect with very little time. And there's this roughness and this wildness that you can get very easily by using charcoal. I think, to me at least, easier than if you use oil painting or aquarelle painting. And then another very recent trip was to the Alpspitze in Germany, and we went up I went with my little daughter, with my 2-year-old daughter. And when I say we, it's usually me and my 2-year-old daughter now. And we went up with a gondola. That was her first snow. And that's just one of the amazing things you can do when you go with a lift, because you just go in 10 minutes, you're up on the Alpspitze and you have this amazing view. And it just takes your breath away again. And then I did really quick drawings again in charcoal of the views there, trying to capture what I felt and how it was to be there. Hopefully, I don't want to say too much, because I think it's just, I don't want to say what people are meant to see in this. It's just trying to capture what it was to be there, I suppose. Yeah, getting a bit of practice in this charcoal medium as well. And then, so this brings me to, I think this brings me to the Sublime Handbook now. So all of this theoretical research, or reading the key texts on the Sublime, and then actually going out, very importantly, going out and seeing it, and doing these field notes and sketches, travel sketches, was all influencing this handbook. So, and I think I need to really say a big disclaimer here, because I think I can't emphasize enough how impossible it is to just say, this is now the Sublime in architecture, this is how it should be in architecture, and just follow my manual and you will have a Sublime building. But what I was trying to do is, because this is such a big subject, and I don't think anyone has time to read all these philosophers and the research written about it, I tried to make it tangible by going into architecture as an example almost, and saying these typologies, for example, could be lending themselves perhaps more than others to a sublime design, or these materials could lend themselves well. But this is more to speculate a little bit and give food for thought to people who then want to get more into it. So that's why at the end of this handbook, there's also further reading recommended and things like that. So what I was trying to do is basically trigger people's curiosity and also just help them get a bit of an access to this really vast um, philosophy written on the sublime, without having to, because I think it's such an it's a concept, a phenomenon that benefits so many people, um, and and the philosophy about it shouldn't be hidden away in deep academia, but it should be just sort of, I mean, people go into the mountains all the time, of course, but to know a bit more about what people wrote about it and what people think about it, could, I think, could be just give a lot of opportunities in architecture and urban design as well. So this is my handbook then, and it's only a draft, and it's only in process so far, but I'm hoping to publish it in a year or two or so. And perhaps you'll be interested in getting a copy then, if it caught your curiosity a little bit. But this is just from the forward, and it's obviously going to change. But things that I wanted to highlight is that it's to facilitate access to the sublime and give suggestions for ways to experience it. So I give a lot of advice for field trips all over the world. So not only my field trips, but sort of other places in the world that are great to visit, depending on where you are, so that people just form their own sense of the sublime. So it's not about my impression of the sublime. It's just trying to give access to people to form their own way. And then the next thing I think is important to say is that there was not my own research, but research conducted by the Berkeley Center of Greater Goods in the US, actually, and a really good article called The Science of Awe. And they are talking about awe, and they talk about the small self, and that it's an effect that makes you feel small compared to the elements, compared to your surroundings. And apparently, and I completely feel that too from my own field trips, but it increases people's sense of connectedness. It increases their ability to do creative and critical thinking, and fuels them with courage. And that is very similar to what the philosophers write about the effects of the sublime. So they are Edmund Burke, Immanuel Kant, and Friedrich Schiller, and the first author, the unknown author, and the others, perhaps minor authors on the sublime, all repeat this notion that you have such a big effect, that the sublime has such a big effect on you, that it feels you feel transcended and transported out of yourself. And in that moment, you feel so uplifted that you get a boost of courage, and actually apparently even a possibility for a paradigm shift. And it catches you off guard, and you just basically leave a lot of the things behind that sort of weigh you down on day-to-day life, and you're sort of transported out of your everyday life, and you're more likely to just sort of think outside the box there, just to say it, like, without making too many claims of my own. But that's what I felt, at least, and that seems like what most of the key philosophers on the subject sort of hinted as well. And it's now a little bit proven with the research of the Greater Goods Center. And then just a few pages from the handbook, all draft, but just to show that this is one of the pages in the destinations for field trip section of the book. And this is just the lightning field in New Mexico. So just an example completely outside Europe. This is, if you are somewhere around New Mexico, probably amazing to go there and witness this. It's like a big field, and they have a sort of lightning conductors in the field. And then if you're lucky, that lightning will strike and you will see this amazing spectacle. I imagine it wonderful and very, very terrifying, but awe-inspiring, but I haven't been there myself. And then just another example page where I was trying to think about typologies, architectural typologies that would lend themselves to the sublime, sort of sacred buildings, mazes and labyrinths. So buildings that are built for a particular effect. As opposed to, let's say, bus stops or so. They are not really built for a sublime effect. So I think it's really important to pick your typology and not apply to any type of architecture. Then lighthouses, things like lighthouses or towers, vast structures and spectacular land art, like the example that I just showed. So these are sort of direct, call them direct typologies, so typologies that are striking in themselves without the background. So the Stonehenge would be an example of that too, even though there's an overlap to other typologies that are meaningful and therefore sublime, like the sacred buildings, but then some sacred buildings you would find sublime possibly without knowing the background as well. So but I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is just an example page of the handbook, and then another example page is just talking about architecture properties. So sort of depths in architecture, in the building itself, and shadows and light effects and reflection and scale itself. So these are all examples of things that could make a design, an architectural design, sublime. But really, these are all extremely speculative and depend really on the building itself. But just I was trying to basically create examples so that it's for the reader a little bit more tangible. What could the sublime be in architecture without claiming this is what it is, just sort of giving tentative suggestions. And raw materials as opposed to synthetic plastic panels and cladding and things like that, just sort of getting an idea and a clear language, I think, as well is very beneficial when you kind of walk into a building and you get the idea of it. If that makes sense, you get the key idea rather than being distracted by a million different details and complicated floor plans and things like that. And also tangibility of the elements. So the Pompeii would be a good example. So you really feel like there has so much time has passed and weather has washed over it, and this is what remains. And longevity and sustainability, very important, I think, for a sublime design. So choose materials that are not harmful, and the entire design process should be sort of sensible and responsible. So, but this is I think I would have to talk a bit more about the handbook itself and about the writing, but this is I'm getting ahead of myself because it's all drafted. So I think I'm at the end, and I already am 3 minutes over time. So I'm going to thank you all very much, and I hope you found it interesting. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much. Katie O'Meara began practice as an architect in Boston. However, design explorations led to considerations of how the landscape, historical context, and physical setting of the built and natural environments informed and reformed their interactions. Through archaeology, landscape, and society, O'Meara has studied the links of making and place, people and settlement. After 25 plus years exploring these themes as a professor, Katie now practices independently as Katie O'Meara Research and Design, collaborating with climate researchers, ecologists, and archaeology teams. Funds from the Lindsay Jones Memorial Research Fund supported field research at the Canyons of the Ancients National Monument. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you. And I want to thank the forum for this opportunity to develop this body of work. Let me just make sure I've got my sharing situation going here. I've been working in the Canyons of the Ancients area for over 15 years with archaeologists from Poland and of course from the Canyons of the Ancients National Monument, Vince McMillan and Radek Polonka from Jagiellonian University. But my time there starts well before. For those not so familiar with the area, we're a few miles west of Mesa Verde National Park. Mesa Verde is probably the first place I remember traveling as my dad swapped his airfare to put into a road trip on his way to a conference. We piled into the station wagon and drove from Indiana to Mesa Verde. So maybe in fourth or fifth grade, I had early imprinting of this landscape. We're looking west here on this video, and we're enjoying a drone flight. I enjoy them, of the McElmo Creek area, the Sand Canyon area of the extensive canyons of the ancient National Monument. Working here over the years with teams from the Maryland Institute College of Art, my own student teams and professor collaborators, and with the team from Poland who specialized in Southwestern United States archaeology and the canyons of the ancients. We spent several weeks each summer and during spring break documenting the landscape. As more landscape-focused researchers and artists and practitioners, we were able to focus on the land between the monuments. We would often look with distant views from one pueblo to an important mountain, from mountain peak to mountain peak, and work in between the more monumental attributes of the landscape. As an architect, and had this pointed out to me in landscape architecture school, it's still hard not to focus on the building. So in spite of our focus being terrain-based and finding ways to describe the landscape so that the bureau in charge of it could preserve the historic and sacred landscapes of the Native American area, it still took iterations of study and examination and a change up of a whole set of tools to actually start to see the landscape and develop different tools to see that. And that's why I appreciate this research grant so much, because in addition to the research I was doing on these teams, I could dwell in my thoughts and reflections about landscape, possibly a lot like how Victoria does in terms of seeking awe and seeking to be in a space that's bigger than we are, and the way that feels connected. I'm starting to think we have archetypes of landscape that we operate in individually. This is the area I'm focused on. The circle is more or less canyons of the ancients geography. You can see a map of it below. As a fairly consistent user of satellite mapping, you can appreciate the Mesa Verde National Park. I always pick that out as a landmark in satellite view. So it's a more familiar cliff dwelling set of sites. The canyons of the ancients is more rugged and less treated for visitors. It emphasizes the landscape more than the buildings within the landscape. This is the Ute Mountain, often considered sacred. Also incredibly practical, with 6 or 7 ecotones providing food, forage, animal hunting grounds throughout the year. So our first view was here along the McElmo Creek in where the canyon, Sand Canyon and Castle Rock sites are. But you can see this sites, the red dots, locating significant sites all along this Great Sage Mesa. So because we'd also worked up here at the top, can you see my mouse, by the way? I don't know if you can see my mouse
Yeah, we
operating.
can see it. We can see it.
Okay. And then I'm like, might as well check and see if my microphone's on too. That's good. So this is the Lowry Pueblo, one of the first places we looked at with students. This gives you an idea of the watersheds that we're looking at. This is the McElmo Creek, and now we're up here on a different drainage. Got a little ahead of myself too. Still in McElmo, this is where my fascination, my enchantment with the landscape, the vivid green landscape, the sand rock surfaces. These drawings are from a perch. As we developed views of the landscape, it partnered well with Radek and Jagiellonian University's view of intervisibility. So they're studying how the visibility from tower to tower, perch to landscape piece interacted. And we developed a set of drawings about the landscape that served a great partnership and was published recently in Antiquities. So these are some of those landscapes. And this is a dual drawing tool of perspective view, elevated perspective view, and three-dimensional landscape view with the site map on the right. Now we get to Lowry Pueblo, further up. With students, we became familiar with the area, and we appreciated that this Pueblo had significant views 360 degrees. So each cardinal point was a different mountain range. The Ute on the upper left has become more or less the central visual focal point for many of the sites along this Hovenweep Canyon, which is here. There's something stark and isolated feeling about this area as you drive for miles on a rough track to get to some of these sites. But it was extremely densely populated in the Puebloan area up to about 1200 AD. These are just some very well-known sites along this Hovenweep Canyon. This is the Lowry Pueblo, the painted, this is the site what we'll look at for agriculture, Painted Hand Pueblo. And the tool I started working with, again, driven by this project, is one archaeologists use, the LIDAR, light detection and range, used to look at the land surface terrain through vegetation. So archaeology publications of colleagues show ancient ruins in the jungle. That's how the LIDAR is used. I had a hope for finding early planting patterns embedded in the soil to show potentially a layering of history of planting and agricultural regimes. Instead, generated and able to generate fantastical and informative topography maps. This is a part of the highly productive landscape of the Great Sage Plains. This entire mesa faces gently sloping south, and it was a recipient of winds blowing from the south, depositing mineral-rich soil for over 2 million years. So it's an incredibly productive landscape. I struggled with the dichotomy of a sacred landscape to a sacred people and a culture cohesively in this area in the past, scattered now. So how can I bring together this idea of a sacred landscape and a commercial agriculture? And I thought, well, maybe I can, maybe I can't, but don't stop working. Keep the camera rolling and wrestle with the ideas and that's what sleepless nights are for. So this is a view of the mesa. You can see the Ute Mountain on the right. That's where the Sand Canyon pueblos and sites are. This is this vast, fertile agricultural land. Debated now with whether you're doing circle irrigation or contoured planting that follow the lands of the lines, so these millions of years of soil deposits don't disappear. It's an extraordinary landscape, and that's what I wrestle with. It's commercial, it's anachronistic to some degree. If I were limiting myself to a timeline, and my position is that the land that was fertile supported 20, 30,000 Puebloan population up until 1200 is still producing. So the landscape is still feeding communities and centering populations. As far as the distribution network has to go, you don't have to be here to eat from here. And this is the view from these extraordinary circle crop landscapes. The juniper and pinyon pine are part of the Canyons of the Ancients National Monument. Maybe one reason they're not planted. And it's also a potentially different slope, different geology. This is the tower at the Painted Hand Pueblo. And this gives us a sense of how these populations existed in this vast and productive landscape. Although I continue to work in the circle crop area because it's so compelling, I also had to ask myself, what would a Native American productive landscape have looked like? I don't think it would have looked like either of the plantings and the verdant crops we've seen. In fact, those are compelling because of such an extraordinary contrast. But I just suspect a much more integrated, sustainable cultivating practice would have been more the nature of the Native American population. The third site in the lower left is the confluence of the McElmo Creek and the Sand Canyon area to the right, and this verdant plateau or productive plateau to the north. I deciphered it, discerned it through satellite mapping, imagery, and putting a lot of miles on a road trip. And I came to this confluence of what I believe is the Hovenweep Canyon drainage and the McElmo Creek. And you can see, using LiDAR imagery, topography, that this is a culmination of these water resources. Coordinated with the LiDAR imagery that's newly provided by the United States Geological Survey at a very high resolution to generate these 3D maps, I have done my own drone flight surveys that you can start to see down here that are 15 to 20,000 images stitched together with an algorithm and geo-referenced and located into the mapping software with the LiDAR imagery. And you can see now how the photographic image overlays with the three-dimensional landscape. And I find it mesmerizing, truly compelling. I've savored the hours and hours I've spent developing these views of the landscape. And although it was imperative that this project be built on something we have already been working on, it's compelling me forward to look at additional projects that can underpin with the research of soil scientists, environmentalists, anthropologists, and of course the Native American community leaders themselves, to better understand, acknowledge, and honor the complex knowledge the Native American people put to use and developed in surviving and thriving in these landscapes. This extreme contrast of desert, rock, and desiccated area to the creek or the beaver dam, the water system flowing through it that may be temporary and may have served a semi-nomadic way of living on the land, to me is the most striking. And I believe that the team led by Radek and supported by Bureau of Land Management are finding significant sites in this immediate area, and it makes total sense to me because of the productive nature of the landscape, the contrast, the mesa top, and the views and access to significant ecotones within the mountain ranges, just a few miles west of the Ute Mountain and the Mesa Verde populations, which I cite because it's known. I think it's frustrating with canyons of the ancients is the largest protected area by far, with the densest number of sites and archaeological finds. 98% are not available to the public. They're preserved to maintain the sacred value to the Native Americans whose ancestors and spirits continue to circle their key sites and visit. Every ruin, every shard is still sacred to them. So much of this area is undisclosed and kept private. But it's an extraordinary landscape. And I, again, want to say thank you to the forum and to the Lindsay Jones Fund for supporting this work.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie.